Colleagues, what a delight to be here at such a celebratory conference. That's the last episode that Denise engineered, showed us all. Absolutely fantastic. And the atmosphere yesterday was very vibrant. And I'm just glad to be part of this in what is actually my 28th year of coming to Australia. It's been just the most wonderful relationship, and at this point in my career, each time I come, I think this is probably the last time, so I'm having those same thoughts today. I want to thank Sandra very much for the invitation to this conference. She was the most wonderful communicator in supporting someone who was preparing to come to a conference. And I want to thank Sandra's team particularly for the warmth of welcome that I, as I know my other keynote speakers share, that we've received since arriving here. You've just heard a lot about the changes that are going to be happening in your system, about the NDIS particularly. And that really is probably going to be quite revolutionary and quite transformative to what you as early childhood interventionists, as early childhood practitioners, actually find yourself doing. But I want to take us just a little bit back from that and back to the heart of the matter, to the children. Because not only are you being asked politically to change the way that you might practice, but actually the children are asking you to change too. Because in this first decade of the 21st century, we have seen the most dramatic and revolutionary changes in the child population. How many of you in recent months, in recent years in your services, have actually gone out to meet a child in their home with their family and come away thinking, I've never seen a child like this before? Only last year I was doing a workshop in New South Wales, and it was on the education of children with complex needs, and finally after 4 years I've got the book to the publisher, and next February the book on the education of children with complex needs will actually be published. But I had this teacher in New South Wales actually put her hand up, and I'd been talking about children with rare syndromes, and she said that she had a child in her early childhood group who had a particular rare syndrome, and the title of this rare syndrome began this side of the page and ended this side of the page, and however good your phonics were, you couldn't possibly blend it to say it. And it turned out that she was the teacher of the only child in Australia who had ever survived with that rare syndrome. In fact, he was the only child in the world with that rare syndrome. So that wee teacher in New South Wales found herself to be the world expert on the education of children with blah-de-blah syndrome, because I can't pronounce it. And that's typical. And certainly in the time that I've been working in schools, and I've been a school principal 3 times, I've seen staff teams over those years come into the staff room, usually after they've had their class at the start of an academic year for about a month, and come in sort of red-faced, hands on hips saying, well, I've never seen a child like this before. You know, and maybe that has been you. And colleagues, now having done what was the national research in the UK across the whole of our system, looking at this changing demographic, this changing child population, there is one thing I can stand here and categorically say to each and every one of you. The children have changed. The children are changing. And the children will continue to change. So if we have changing children, do we have changing services? Because certainly the hallmark of practice, and I'm sure Denise, well, from what I've read of the best practice paper, it has this as its heart and in its essence, that innovation has to be the hallmark of 21st century practice in the field of early childhood intervention. We don't know all the answers, we never have. And we don't have all the tools in our early childhood intervention toolkit to truly embrace this changing population of children at their point of learning need, at their point of development. This is a website I need you all to make sure you've got, because all of the resources I'm referring to you can find free and downloadable on this website. If you go to the second button there, the project resources, you will find briefing sheets about all of the new generation of children that we have. Children born prematurely, children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, children with Fragile X, and so on and so on. It also has on it the engagement profile and scale, which I'm going to refer to briefly at the end, as a tool, a pedagogical tool, to enable you to look at, and how does this child engage? That is the starting point. Whatever task or activity you're doing, whatever program you're implementing, it is how that child engages and the quality of engagement that is the core of your mission and purpose as early childhood practitioners. When we conducted this research project across the UK, and in that role I was the Secretary of State appointed by Her Majesty's Government into a selective role to just focus on this. We asked 2 questions of practitioners, and practitioners in early childhood settings as well, in Bromley and Wolverhampton particularly, which are places that Denise has visited on her travels in her role as President, and then across the other phases of the sector, because this couldn't just be an early childhood piece of work, although you're the ones who are seeing the biggest changes. We need to know, as your words here are suggesting, you are the foundation, but it's a lifespan journey. We've just had, my middle child, Kate, has Down syndrome. And Kate lives in her own house with 2 friends. And one of the things I've said in recent years, I'd love to bring some of Kate's teachers back together so they could see all those work in those early years, all those temper tantrums, all that signing, all of those communication things, all those making books for her to teach her to read, and so on, that they could see that the fruits of their labours have resulted in this beautiful young woman who, let me tell you, was the major cheerleader for the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. She didn't matter which team, and Nauru had the biggest cheers. Most of us in the audience had never heard of Nauru, but Kate was very keen on supporting Nauru. So we had a big 30th birthday party, and all those people came. And it was just the most wonderful celebration. And you need to know that things you do today with a 12-month-old, an 18-month-old, in 30 years' time, we may still treasure as a family. We may even still do them, but certainly we remember them. That is your legacy. So we asked colleagues, teachers, practitioners, who are the children with complex needs? You're using this phrase, complex needs. Tell us about it. And I want you to know it had international collaboration, because the previous government, not the current insane one, actually allowed me to validate our findings against cohorts in other English-speaking countries. So I had some folk in the States, in Ireland, in New Zealand, and I had school representatives from Victoria and also in South Australia, and then Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, because of the way the UK is structured. So this piece of research, I'm not big on numbers, I'm a qualitative researcher, so the validity in this piece of research, for those that you need to know it, is by multiple trials, by multiple teachers in multiple settings. But there is a research imperative here, and I don't want to make you all researchers, but the essence of your practice has to be inquiry. How many times do you meet a child and then you investigate, you explore, you discover, you find out about that disability? And as Michael Goralnik, the president of the International Society of Early Intervention, has said, we know so much about childhood disability that we must move to second-generation research. This must be practitioner-led and evidence-based. That's you. You are the practitioners. Every time you meet a child, you keep records, don't you? Now, I as a researcher could switch that and say your record keeping on a child becomes a data set. And look how many data sets we have. And I just wondered, Denise, what the future role of ECIA is in research, in practitioner-led, evidence-based research. I loved your phrase yesterday, evidence-based practice and practice-led evidence. And how are we systematically and deductively reporting that evidence to the wider community? So we have to acknowledge that with this group of children, we do not know all the answers. And as this one early interventionist said, we need a finding out culture in our early intervention services to better inform our practice. We do not have all of the answers. Again, this resonates, I think, with what Denise said yesterday in her opening words. This project, let me tell you, did not start in a university. In fact, I was well out of the university sector at this point. It started in practice settings, whether they be early childhood or school classrooms. And we looked at the evidence of, on a good day, what were teachers doing with children that was successful. And we started to mould that pedagogy, to trial it out in other settings. Would that work with other children in other places? And that meant a process of inquiry. That's a part of the tool of our trade as interventionists and teachers, is to inquire. And at times we didn't know all the answers, and maybe then we resorted to the research as a resource. So research and inquiry was a dynamic, but it was also a resource in this process. So to just summarize at this juncture, colleagues, we have new etiologies. We have new causes for disability. That rare syndrome child I mentioned in New South Wales would not have survived. We have a Prime Minister in the UK whose son had Ohtahara syndrome. Ivan was one of the first children to ever survive, and at the start of the project I led the research on, I met Ivan and observed him in his school. He was 6 then, and Ivan died when he was 6.5. So 21st century disability knows no boundaries. It is pervasive across all sectors of our society. So with those new etiologies, we need more research. But that research is in your hands. It is not driven, certainly in the UK, it is not driven by a university. Those days have gone. Universities are a resource to our research culture, but they are not the main driver in the United Kingdom. It is actually the practitioners, but we need others around them who can support systematically and deductively those research processes. And we need new vocabularies to describe these children. And I think their neuroscience we ignore at our peril, because the insights it can give us on brain functioning are just incredible. But at the heart of this, the juncture of this, it's how we develop new responsive interventions. We do not have all the tools in our toolkit. So we now have a child population called children with complex learning difficulties and disabilities. CLDD is now a term within the portfolio in the United Kingdom to describe these children. In essence, it's this, and I don't expect you to read it. Again, you'll find it on that website. But however, this has been validated with an Australian context too. And you'll see words like mental health starting to appear there. In September, in the new UK special needs legislation, mental health comes in as an area in which teachers can work. That is the first time in my 30-plus year career that we've ever had permission as teachers to work officially in the field of mental health. We are Tier 1 services. You will identify infant mental health issues in children. And these are the key words. To have a complex need, to have 2 or more coexisting, interlocking, overlapping, compounding learning difficulties or disabilities. 2 or more. This particular article, which is published in South Australia, but you can download it from my website, which is where a lot of the resources to support today and the script for today you will find. Actually, as compared UK and Australian research, and as said, we have an emerging population that's rapidly changing, largely due to modern medical progress, prematurity, but also societal factors, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And those are 2 groups, particularly I'm going to focus on, at the peril of not talking in depth about autism, about Fragile X syndrome, about rare syndromes, about mental health issues per se. Those, again, there are papers on my website, or there are resources on that first website that I gave you in this presentation. So let's consider those children born prematurely, because colleagues, believe it or not, in the first decade of the 21st century, these children have totally transformed our special needs and disability populations, whether in early intervention services or in schools. In Australia, you have 20,000 babies born prematurely each year. I was talking to paediatricians at the Children's Hospital in Westmead last week, and they say, in fact, it's such a rapid rise. That figure is probably already getting somewhat out of date. To put you into the UK context, which obviously is a larger population, smaller landmass, 80,000 children in the UK now survive prematurely. Of those, 90% now survive. Sorry, 80,000 are born, 90% survive, so that's roughly, my maths is always rough, roughly 72,000. And of those, 63% survive with a disability. That's roughly 50,000. So we've recently had an issue where our national number of children with disabilities has gone up from 700,000 to 950,000 in a 5-year period, and the researchers are saying that's an underestimate. What would that do to your NDIS? Is it a finite resource, or are you as early interventionists making sure they know that this is an expanding and changing population? And it's not just your women whimsy saying that. There is clear evidence base for that. And we, as an evidence-based profession, need to use evidence-based facts to construct rational argument. In the USA, you have 80% of babies born pre-26 weeks. It is really, colleagues, the survival of children born prematurely at 28 weeks or before that is causing this massive change. Because the brain at pre-28 weeks gestation is white matter, it is not grey matter. Bring up your biology lessons in your head and the picture of the brain. That grey matter stuff and all those squiggly bits, the cortical folding, is not there till post-28 weeks gestation. So when these babies survive in an incubator, it is totally a different environment. Where should they have been? Not in an incubator. They should have been sloshing around in darkness and warm water inside their mother's womb. You all know about the environmental influences on development. But the state has also analysed that 96% of the 28 to 31 weeks are surviving. So you might think, oh, great, Barry, well, no problem there then. No. 28 to 31 weeks is the phase when the language centres, the Broca's region, etc., in the brain begin to form. Find me a primary school that isn't currently concerned with their prep intakes and the language levels of those children. We need one clear question on the admission registers to all of our schools and services. Is there anything in the birth history of this child we need to know? It is not an invasive question. Parents can always say no, but you need that information for all sorts of learning reasons. Another Australian study here saying that not only do these children's brains then develop differently, but cerebral lesions can form, which may again alter the developmental trajectory. It is no longer right to say, oh, well, they'll just be a bit delayed and they'll catch up. No. As we were told powerfully yesterday by Diane, we need honesty. And it's not the reality for some of these children. That old adage would be fine with children born later, prematurely, but let's say after 34 weeks, but it's not right for children born pre-28 weeks gestation. And the Lancet, the insignificant international medical journal out of the UK, has now published that there's a rise of 47% in children surviving at the 22 to 24 week gestational phase. When does abortion end and prematurity begin? And what does the brain of a 23-weeker look like? And have you ever taught one? Because I'm not sure I have. Similarly, I want to use as much Australian research as possible because you as a country have grown significantly in the 28 years I've been coming out here. And you have a very strong research base. Trouble is, it's like working with 7 different nations on one landmass. And I can say that's an outsider. And you just need to coordinate a bit better, guys, because it's all, your answers are all in your own country. You do not need some Brit coming and showing you where your answers lie. You know, this research is showing that even as teenagers, children born prematurely will not have the same brain plasticity, i.e. the same malleability and adaptive function for new learning situations. So children born prematurely at the age of 11 are particularly at high risk of mathematics difficulties. The parietal lobe in the brain, this is where neuroscience comes in, the parietal bit in the brain is the parietal lobe is the bit that deals with numeracy and mathematical computation. Now, with respect, most of you probably taught numeracy till the cows come home. Did you know it was the parietal lobe? No, be honest. I didn't till 5 or 6 years ago. But now we do know. There's a book out there on that stall, the first one that you go out on, called How the Special Needs Brain Learns by David Souza. It's very basic, but it starts, and we need to get into the language of neuroscience. We can stop fiddling about and get some direct answers. This is New Zealand research, so not quite you, but we got very close. Look at these figures. 4 children in every primary classroom, not in every primary school, 4 in every primary classroom. Now, you may be from a primary school or you may know one. You just now do a quick mathematics exercise. Work out how many classes and multiply by 4. And do those teachers know? And do they have an adaptive pedagogy that embraces these children? These children are, as one mom said to me, wired differently, and she's absolutely spot on. The research we've conducted now would demonstrate that time and time again. The next time you get frustrated with a child, because we're only human, just think they're wired differently. Colleagues, A doesn't go to B, B doesn't go to C, C doesn't go to D, A goes to X, B goes to Y, C goes to Z. The trouble is you can't see in there to know how that wiring is different. It's only through your responsive pedagogy that you will shape and mould that around the learning profile, the learning pathway of that child, wired differently. This is from the Epicure study, and the Epicure study is a longitudinal study in the UK, and every year the children are looked at, but every 6 years is a major investigation. This was at the 11-year-old juncture. This is absolutely fascinating stuff. Over 60% of all children born prematurely develop ADHD. But it's ADHD of the inattention variety. It's not the more organic form of ADHD, you know, the banging, shouting off at you, banging, running out the classroom and so on. This is the child who, when you start a task, flits from one thing to another. ADHD of the inattention variety. And the management pathway is different again. Are we on that page? Children with emotional problems. Is it any wonder? You can probably just about make out that picture, the invasive procedures. Patricia Champion over in New Zealand, I've said this to Denise, she needs to come over to an ECIA conference. She's got the most remarkable insights as a teacher and a therapist into the care and management of these children, their educational development. Patricia would say that over 80% of invasive procedures on children born prematurely are carried out without any analgesic, no painkiller. If those kids aren't already messed up because of prematurity of birth, then we're just emotionally traumatizing them too. The autistic spectrum bit is fascinating. By the age of 11, 10% of ASD children had developed, 10% of prematurely born children had developed ASD. But when we profiled and how does that ASD look like, it mirrored what Professor Sir Michael Rutter had discovered in the Romanian orphanage children. And we know those children, their ASD is due to severe impoverishment, emotionally and socially, no interaction with human beings, left in their own feces for days on end, etc. Bring that back to incubator. You can be the most fantastic parent there 24/7, but you cannot touch, hold, stroke, coo your premature baby in the way you can a full-term baby. Wired differently. It is an external brain. And therefore, many children born prematurely start to show symptoms of, if not a full diagnosis, of autistic spectrum disorder. There are some new causal bases. And the last one there, psychiatric disorder. When this study reports its analysis of the children at 14, I think we're going to see a lot more psychiatric disorder. Already the BMA in the UK has revised the national figure on mental health in children, all children, from 1 in 10 to 2 in 10. An earlier study I conducted for the UK showed that 4 in 10 of all young people, children and young people with a learning difficulty, what you'd call perhaps an intellectual disability, experience mental health problems. And in autism, it's 6 in 10, particularly with the onset of adolescence. And you don't need to think, well, that's adolescence. You need to think, I'm an early interventionist. I need to build emotional resilience in our children from day one. It is not easy to live in this world with a disability. As my daughter will tell you. You need to be building emotional resilience from day one. And just flipping to autism as it stands in Australia, you know, those are some of the current figures, but can I point you to Dr. Natalie Seiloff's piece in Sandy Johnson's book, which is an Australian publication. Natalie, as a paediatrician at the Children's in Westmead, has analysed the Australian autism child population. Only 25% of your Australian ASD children have classic autism, Canner's or Asperger's. The other 75% have autism that is arising from new or non-classic causal bases. We are still educating and intervening with children with ASD based on pedagogy and assessment instruments that were standardised on the classic population. And yet 75% have non-classic ASD. Is that pedagogy appropriate? Are those assessment tools valid? It's a big issue in the UK at the moment about the assessment of ASD girls, because women have more social brains. Men are different. There's a strong evidence base in this room for that statement. And women, you have more social brains. And autistic women have more social brains, so they smile. And they make eye contact, so they don't tick the boxes on the assessment. So we're underdiagnosing girls with ASD who at 14 and 15 are getting diagnosed with bipolar, and when it's analysed, they're actually ASD. They've struggled all those years without supports. Early intervention needs to do better. Attachment disorder, it depends when you were trained as a teacher. Attachment was in, attachment was out, attachment was in, attachment was out. All I know is it needs to be in. The range of issues these children are presenting needs to be in. On that website I gave you, you'll find 3 briefing sheets around attachment. So I like this piece of work that Patricia Champion, my colleague in New Zealand, has done, where she's looked at brain development and then related it to pedagogy. And you'll see the last bit, the blue bit, will be the sort of post 28 weeks. But if a child is born pre-28 weeks, the brain is in the limbic phase, and really they're capable of emotional engagement, not at that point learning. That has significant implications for the way we practice. So just to summarize prematurity, lots of causes that I haven't really touched on, but maternal age, teenage pregnancy, all of those, drugs, smoking, alcohol, are reasons for premature birth, IVF included, and those are some of the outcomes for the child, which I really have touched on most of those. But some of these children will live with lifelong conditions. You know, you get primary schools now with receiving prematurely born children who are quite bright and active, but actually come with their oxygen cylinder because their lungs never inflated properly. Let's move on to FAS. This, for me, in recent years, has been a major issue because when I was last a principal of a school for children with ASD, we were getting lots of children referred who actually, the causal base of their autistic spectrum was fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. That's also a rewired brain. It is an external brain. So my postdoc work at Oxford was to look at how do we teach children with FASD. That resulted in 2012, this book, Educating Children with FASD, which we launched down in Adelaide. And then for the recent years, I've actually been working on an interdisciplinary text, which was then also launched in Adelaide last year at the ACE conference. And this actually has chapters in it from early childhood in Western Australia. It actually has 2 very significant chapters by Professor Elizabeth Elliott, the academic paediatrician at Westmead in Sydney, which reports for the first time anywhere in the world the FASD prevalence studies on your Aboriginal Indigenous population, which is reporting 30% of Aboriginal children are born with FASD. So this is an international text with all of the disciplines. It's very transdisciplinary, Denise. And I think it would be a rich resource. There are also New Zealand chapters in there, but there are also issues to learn from other sectors. I went to the Telethon Institute when I was in Perth on Monday, Tuesday, and they're doing some work in the criminal justice system. Children with FASD are the largest percentage group going into fostering and adoption in Australia, 4 out of every 5. Young people with FASD are the largest percentage group going into the criminal justice system in Australia. And what are you doing to divert those bleak outcomes? All of this is really significantly linked to the drinking culture that exists in Australia. It exists in the UK as well. Last year, this figure was published. 28% of Australian women between 14 and 24 binge drink. Don't get too worried. Well, do get worried, actually, because that's a quarter of your child population. But I just want to own the statement that in Britain, it is actually 38% of young women in the 18 to 25 age group binge 3 times a week. The drunken young woman who has unprotected sex with probably the drunken young man will not know she's pregnant for the first 12 weeks, by which time all the migration of cells has been done and the damage to the fetus is done also. The thing with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, it is 100% preventable and it is 100% irreversible. We need one clear statement. If you're pregnant or planning a pregnancy, don't drink. You need one clear statement. The teratogenic, the poisonous effects of alcohol are lethal. This is a lifelong pervasive disability. If you want to know more, come to the workshop on Saturday morning. But brain damage is certainly the most serious aspect of this. We need, and this group of children, which is why I wrote the book on educating children with FASD, we certainly do not have all the pedagogy, all the intervention strategies. We're quite weak, actually. And yet this population, certainly in the UK, it's 1% of our child population. To put that in context, autism is 1% of our child population. I can go around Australia and find provision for children with autism, and so in the UK. I can find no provision for children with FASD anywhere. This is a societal issue as well as an educational issue. But your concern as educationalists, as interventionists, is this child deserves the best service I can deliver. Just look at that brain. Don't you want to ask which bits are missing? How is that going to affect learning when you intervene? The latest early childhood studies, May and Gossage in the USA, lead on this work, are showing that in the US and some Western cultures in Europe, FASD could be as high as 2 to 5%. It is certainly rising. You only have to walk down your main streets on a Friday and Saturday night, and you know what I'm saying. This is based on Australian research. It is in the Interdisciplinary Perspectives book. This gives you the figures for your country, for your children. And it is not just an Indigenous issue, it is a non-Indigenous issue because of the binge drinking also. 51% have a sibling with FASD. I'm using this to show you the facial features, but that's FAS, and to make the point that actually it transcends ethnic groups. But I think there's promise in neuroscience. There's new discoveries to be made there that are applicable to our work. And as Susa says in the book I've mentioned, if you want to scribble down that name so you can go and look at that book on the bookstall, this work can give us clues to guide our decisions and practices. At times we have to make informed guesses based on inquiry, let's be honest, as to how we intervene. And we need to start to build up those evidence bases from our practice. This is taken from Harvard University, where they're talking about 700 new neural connections every second in the first few years of life. 700 per second. It's like 60,000 a day. Phenomenal wiring of the brain. Phenomenal. And then at the end of that first year, the brain goes through a pruning process, throws out what it doesn't want. But what I've done here is blended the research I've just done, which obviously is more child-centered in terms of how children learn, and I'm totally convinced that engagement is the key. And for children with complex needs, it is personalized engagement. And the new book that's coming out next year, and we've put some flyers, it is going to be available in Australia. My publisher's just opened a publishing house out here. That will be out next February. And that will articulate not just the needs of the children, but what to do. What to do with those children. Engagement is the umbrella. It is the all-embracing component that will enable these children to learn effectively. It's a quote from the forthcoming book. We've developed an engagement profile. Again, I can't go into it in any depth, but this is an Australian teacher's work around that profile. 7 indicators of engagement are the 7 words most used in the analysis of the literature around engagement, particularly Robin McWilliams' work in this field. And what this teacher did was wrote how the child initiates, persists, anticipates, discovers, etc., etc. Very simple. Sometimes, if a child has a literacy or numeracy difficulty, what do? We give them more numeracy or more literacy. No. Sometimes we need to strip it back and say, how does this child engage? There's full explanations on there. There is an early childhood version of this. It's a section written for early childhood practitioners. I'm afraid you just have to go away and look at the website and read. But it's not difficult. It really is not difficult. It's an observational tool. Because whatever you're doing, you want the child to engage, don't you? It's key. So when we did the project, I was conscious that as a community, any country can contribute, and we were really privileged to have Paul Hutchins from the Children's in Westmead as one of the advisors to that project. So whilst it was UK-based, it definitely had an international dimension. And Paul felt in his final evaluation of the project, it achieved a dialogue between biology and environment and between learning and development. So don't just listen to my words, there's one of your own leading people commending that work to you as valid in the Australian context. Because you have children with complex needs undeniably in your system. You are a developed country. Your pathways, whilst your population is smaller, your pathways in your children are no different to those in the UK or in New Zealand or in the USA. These children are the next frontier of education. Big challenge. But hey, isn't that the joy of our work? Isn't that what makes us get up every morning and want to get in there, want to discover, want to find out, want to solve, want to make a difference? That's the excitement of being an early interventionist. And you get to do it first before anybody else gets their hands on them. You're not a whinging teacher in a secondary school saying, if only they'd done this in primary. Colleagues, there are ways forward. You can rethink. Is your service going to change? Well, actually, your service is going to have to change because of NDIS. But I want you to change it because children need you to change it, because that's what they're asking of you. So rethink. Or do you want to redesign? Denise does. Restructure. Or do you just want to remain the same? If you need an answer to that question, then maybe we look at this.
Ready, Joshua?
You ready, Joshua?
1, 2, 3.
His cochlear implants have just been switched on.
Joshua. Hi. Hi. I love you. I love you. Hello. Do you hear your mommy? That's wonderful. Do you like that? Do you like that? I think you do. I think you do. Hi. Hi. Joshua. Joshua. Oh. Yeah. Joshua. Yeah. Hi. Hi. Is that nice? Yeah? Good boy. Good boy.
Engagement is the key. But new technologies, cochlear implants, can bring new pathways to learning, can revolutionize life chances for our children in ways that, in the 20-year history of this association, we have not seen before.
Ready, Joshua?
Sorry, let me get to the next one. Oops. Many things we need can wait. The child cannot. Now is the time his bones are being formed, his blood is being made, his mind is being developed. To him, we cannot say tomorrow. His name is today. Thank you.